Welcome, my name is Jeremy Katz. I am the Senior Director of Archives at the William Breman Jewish Heritage Museum in Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you so much for your interest in our summer speaker series presented by the Breman Museum in partnership with the Southern Jewish Historical Society, the Savannah Jewish Federation, the Savannah Jewish Educational Alliance, and the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina. Now, speaking of those partners, please allow me to introduce Phyllis Leffler, who is the president of the Southern Jewish Historical Society, who would like to personally thank these great organizations. Phyllis.
Good morning, everybody. It's so great to see so many people online this morning for what I know is going to be a wonderful program. So I'm just going to talk very, very briefly about the different sponsors for this program. And I want to start with the William Breman Jewish Heritage Museum in Midtown Atlanta. This museum just was established in 1993. And its purpose is to connect people to Jewish history, culture, and the arts. The museum has a permanent Holocaust exhibit, gallery and auditorium space, and a growing and very rich archive overseen by none other than Jeremy Katz. Now, the museum, of course, right now is closed due to the pandemic, but their work has not stopped. And this partnership that Jeremy has been fundamental in helping to create is one of the ways in which that work has not stopped. So I, for one, am very grateful to Jeremy for having encouraged us all to get together in this common work that we do. Now, one of the archives that the Breman Museum holds is the Savannah Jewish Archives, and the Savannah Jewish Federation is a second partner. The Jewish Federation, established in 1943, coordinates, facilitates, and enhances Jewish communal life in Savannah and around the world. The Savannah Jewish Federation is dedicated to preserving and enriching Jewish life, both in Savannah, but also to perpetuating identification with the State of Israel. And then the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina, another partner, is now in its 26th year, and its purpose is to study, preserve, and promote awareness of the history of South Carolina. Not too surprisingly, right? South Carolina Historical Society. They also collect oral histories and archives. They have the Jewish Merchant Project, which is an ongoing project, digital cemetery records, and a robust biannual publication. More information can be found at jhssc.org. And some of you will know that they have a program that is another conversational-based program on August 31st. So if you're interested, you can go to their website and learn more about it. Finally, I'd just like to say a brief word about the Southern Jewish Historical Society, of which I have the honor to be president right now. That organization has existed continuously since 1977. We host an annual conference, which we unfortunately cannot have this year. We have a fabulous academic journal that we put out once a year, and an active grant and awards program. The Southern Jewish Historical Society has been at the forefront of new scholarship about the Jewish South for over 40 years. This series of talks that we're co-sponsoring, we've been able to create in lieu of a conference. We have more coming up, so I hope you will check out our website for our September and October programs. And that website is just the jewishsouth.org, www.jewishsouth.org. And now I'm going to pass it back to Jeremy. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you so much, Phyllis, and all of our amazing partners. Even though this is our last installment of the Summer Speaker Series, it's been such a pleasure working with all these amazing organizations. I look forward to many more opportunities in the future to work together. Before I introduce our speaker for today, just some very quick housekeeping. You all are muted right now. Please stay that way throughout the entire program. Unmuting yourself creates unwanted background noise and feedback, which distracts from the presentation. If you have any questions for our presenter, please put them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat and collating all the questions, and we'll pose those to Marcia at the end of the program during the question and answer section. Also, immediately following the program, I will be sending a follow-up email to all registered participants. In this email, it will include a link to a survey. Please take a few minutes to fill out this survey. It provides invaluable data and feedback, not only for applying for increasingly important grants to support the museum and our operations, but also to help us improve future programs so that we can continue to offer and really improve our content that we're creating for the community. It also includes a link to future programs that are created by the Breman Museum. So I hope that you'll check those out and join us for programs, virtual programs in the future as well. Now, without further delay, it is my pleasure to pass it over to Professor Stephen Whitfield, who will introduce our speaker for today. Professor Whitfield, please take it away.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. The task that has been assigned to me is basically to introduce Marcia. And then at the end of her more formal presentation, what I will do is pose a couple of questions to her just to follow up before there can be Q&A. It's true that I once taught American Studies at Brandeis University, but my more pertinent qualifications consist of having grown up in Jacksonville, Florida, having been bar mitzvahed and confirmed at Congregation Ahavat Chesed in Jacksonville. And therefore, I'm extremely grateful to Marcia for all that she has done, for her dedication, her tenacity in reporting and in discovering, really, for the benefit of all of us, the experience of Jews in the state of Florida. No one is better qualified and has done more to do that. She was the founding executive director of the Jewish Museum of Florida, located on Miami Beach, now associated with Florida International University. Marcia created the Mosaic program, the exhibits that went through more than a dozen cities in Florida, revealing the various artifacts and photographs associated with the Jews of Florida. She also co-authored with Rachel Heimovitz the Florida Jewish Heritage Trail, a book which allows people to basically cover the geography of the state of Florida. A longstanding member, I should add, of the Southern Jewish Historical Society, and is now my delight to turn the rest of this program for the next roughly half hour over to Marcia Jo Zerivitz.
Thank you so much, Steve. Shalom to our Zoom participants, and thanks to all the sponsors. Florida is the third most populous state in the nation, with more than 21 million people that includes about 750,000 Jews, which makes it also the third largest Jewish population in the nation. To celebrate 35 years of my collecting and interpreting the material evidence of Jewish life in Florida, I wrote a book on what was once a hidden history. Why? First, even though Florida is probably the earliest place where Jews arrived in what became the United States, no one else had done the research. Second, to debunk myths, like a notion that the history started on Miami Beach post-World War II, and in reality, it was probably 348 years prior, but surely 150 years prior. Third, it is important to have Jewish memories for Jewish continuity. And fourth, because it is timely. With the rise in anti-Semitism, when Jews are even blamed for the current pandemic, it is important to show what Jews have achieved to improve the quality of life for all people. This gives Jews a sense of pride to strengthen Jewish identity and the knowledge to combat anti-Semitism. The word history contains the word story. Jews are storytellers. In the allotted 30 minutes, I share a very brief overview of the Jewish experience in Florida with some short stories. For example, it is 1986, before cell phones, Google, and Wikipedia. Keep that in mind. We didn't even know the word Wikipedia. And I am in Jacksonville interviewing Rosalie and Robert Coleman about his grandfather, George Delinsky. In 1857, George was the first boy born in Florida to a Jewish family that planted roots in the state and has continued to live there as Jews since 1850. I asked if they have any of George's personal possessions. Rosalie chimes in, I have his pocket watch with Hebrew numerals that he carried his entire life. It's in the safety deposit box at the bank, and no one in the family knows that I have it. Would you like to see it? I say, absolutely. And at the bank, I ask if our Mosaic Jewish Life in Florida project could borrow it for display in the traveling exhibition. She says yes. And then in 1995, when we created the Jewish Museum of Florida, I asked if she would donate it to the collections. She said yes. This is how the material evidence and collective historic memories of more than 250 years of Jewish life in Florida were retrieved, piece by piece. The family continues to live in Jacksonville and has 75 descendants into the 8th generation. And yes, they are Jewish. I always get asked that. I became a Florida history and news junkie, making the Jewish connection to stories. This morning, like every morning, I read the Washington Post on my phone. Since 2013, Marty Barron has been executive editor, a position he formerly held at the Miami Herald. In 1954, he was born in Tampa, where he grew up. Barron's role as editor of the Boston Globe was highlighted in the movie Spotlight. I'm sure a lot of you saw that. He led the 2003 investigation into a cover-up of sexual abuse by priests within the Boston Archdiocese. When I heard him speak in St. Petersburg, where I live, in 2016, he said, "We will publish what we think the public should know. We do our research and then tell people what we found. Tell it straight. People are entitled to know the facts," unquote. This is the philosophy I followed for my book, to present facts and not utter judgment. I watch CNN News. 5-time Emmy Award winner Jeff Zucker was named president of CNN Worldwide in 2013 and then chairman Warner Media News and Sports in 2019. He was born and raised in Miami. His parents, Arlene and Matthew, still live there. As a matter of fact, I got this photo from his mom. I checked on my family on Facebook. Isn't that how we track our children and grandchildren? Since 2008, Cheryl Sandberg has been #2 at Facebook, the world's largest social network. She was in the news just last month on the issue of doing a better job of policing hate content. Sandberg grew up in North Miami Beach and maintains a circle of women friends from middle and high school there. I put on my Spanx bra as I dressed. Founder Sarah Blakely was born and raised in Clearwater and attended Florida State University. She also has a big connection to Atlanta, of course. In 2000, Oprah Winfrey named Spanx her favorite product, and sales took off, reaching $1 million in its first year. Forbes touted her as the youngest self-made billionaire in the whole world in 2012. Spanx is now available in 50 countries. I checked the cash in my wallet that included a $100 bill with Robert Rubin's signature. Rubin was sworn in as the 70th U.S. Secretary of the Treasury in 1995. As a fourth grader, Rubin moved with his family from New York to Miami Beach. He graduated from Miami Beach High School in 1956 and went on to become a lawyer, banker, and economist. Journalists say they would rather tell the story than be the story. One of the most tragic stories is of dual American-Israeli citizen and journalist Stephen Sotloff, shown here in the center of the photo in a black helmet. He was beheaded by ISIS on international TV in September 2014 in Syria. Perhaps a lot of you remember that. He was born and raised in Miami, a grandson of Holocaust survivors. A University of Central Florida journalism graduate, he studied Hebrew and Arabic in Israel and Yemen so he could tell human interest stories about the Middle East. So just when did Florida Jewish history begin? Jews could not live in Florida for 250 years after Florida was discovered in 1513. That is when Ponce de Leon first reached the east coast of Florida near St. Augustine, found the natives hostile, and named the new land La Florida, meaning Feast of Flowers, because it was Easter time. Because this was during the Inquisition, which you remember was 1478 to 1834, and Ponce de Leon sailed for Spain, which then owned Florida, only Catholics could live here for the next 250 years. Until 1763, just 30 years after the first Jews settled in Georgia, as a matter of fact. 1763 is when the Treaty of Paris was signed following the French and Indian War. Spain ceded Florida to Britain, and people other than Catholics could finally settle, including Jews. These Pensacola minutes of the council reflect the names of 3 Jews who arrived in 1763. Alexander Solomons, Joseph D. Palacios, and Samuel Israel bought property and set up stores there, selling goods to the British and trading with Jews in Charleston, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia. When we went to Sunday school, we learned that the first Jews arrived in America in 1654 in New Amsterdam that became New York, after sailing from Recife, Brazil, to escape the Inquisition there. In the early 1980s, when I began research, it was my hypothesis that it was possible that Florida Jewish history started here with the Conversos in 1565 in St. Augustine. Jacob Rader Marcus, founder of the American Jewish Archives, told me that in all probability there were Jews in Florida in the 16th century. If this could be documented, it would rewrite American Jewish history, that it started in Florida and not New York. Historians note that the third Spanish Florida governor, Pedro Menendez Marquez, could have been a converso, and there are Spanish Jewish names on lists of soldiers and settlers in St. Augustine in 1565. But even with continuing pleas, I kept hitting walls when trying to engage serious scholarly study on this subject. Finally, Rabbi Merrill Shapiro, who I had known in Orlando and had then moved to St. Augustine, he heard me and organized the St. Augustine Jewish Historical Society, digging in to unearth some interesting facts. In my book, Rabbi Shapiro presents the first publications of their findings. It's very exciting. We can say that likely the history between 1492 and 1654 needs to be rewritten to include this chapter in 16th century Florida. We do know that 200 years ago, 26 years before Florida's 1845 statehood, one Jew took advantage of development opportunities. In 1820, a year before Florida became a U.S. territory, Moroccan-born Moses Levy began purchasing 100,000 acres that spread from around Gainesville west to Tampa Bay. Levy formed the Florida Association, the first development corporation in Florida. Sam Proctor, who I'm sure everyone knows, a founder and former president of the Southern Jewish Historical Society, and my cheerleader throughout my quest, told me that Moses Levy was the most important person in early Florida Jewish history. Moses Levy built his 1,000-acre pilgrimage plantation just south of Gainesville on a lake that's now on the campus of the University of Florida. No photo exists of Levy, only this drawing of his house created by Chris Monaco, who lives in Micanopy, and it's based on Levy's writings. Pilgrimage was a fully functioning plantation that lasted 13 years, from 1822 to 1835. Its main commodity was sugarcane, which Levy reintroduced to Florida. It was intended as a refuge for oppressed European Jews to become farmers in a communitarian settlement, the first on U.S. soil. Felix Warburg of the famous German banking family was his recruiting agent in Europe. At least 5 German Jewish families lived there, including Warburg. That lake at the University of Florida is named Lake Warburg. Moses Levy was Florida's first education commissioner, an advocate of public schools, and instrumental in establishing Florida's first free public school. He was also a vigorous advocate for the gradual abolition of slavery and the human treatment of enslaved people. Moses Levy was the father of David Levy Hewley, the first U.S. Senator from Florida and the first U.S. Senator of Jewish heritage in American history. There had been 2 Jewish senators from Florida, David Levy Hewley and then Richard Stone, who served from 1975 to 1980. David moved to Pilgrimage at age 17 and lived there for 4 years, helping his father run the operation. Then he apprenticed with a lawyer in Tallahassee. There were no law schools in those times. That's what you had to do. You had to apprentice. And he was admitted to the bar in 1836 and got involved in politics. Florida became the 27th state in 1845 with the leadership of David Levy Hewley. He helped draft Florida's Constitution and worked hard for statehood when there were about 60,000 people in Florida. That included about 100 Jews. He faced anti-Semitism in the U.S. Senate. Vice President at the time, John Quincy Adams, referred to him as that alien Jew delegate from Florida, even though he had gone through citizenship proceedings twice. He served as senator until secession of Florida from the Union and served in a Union prison for 1 year. Hewley was the family's ancestral name from Morocco, a name he added to Levy when he went to Washington. David Levy Hewley was important both in politics and in the economy. In 1861, he formed Florida Railroad Company, the first cross-state rail system, where goods arriving from Europe could be shipped across the state instead of that dangerous path around the tip of Key West. The railroad operated for 80 years, 80. There are several places named for him in Florida, and during World War II, there was a U.S. Liberty ship named for him. Today, there are still some who say Hewley was not Jewish. In my book, you will find a defense about his conversion. It's based on a letter his wife, Nanny, wrote him in 1872, which is 11 years after his political career, pleading that he be baptized with their son and received into the church. So this is evidence that he had not been baptized up to 1872. And the evidence is that he died in 1886 as a Jew. Sam Proctor was emphatic that he never converted, and no document has shown up to support that myth. Moses Levy's plantation was destroyed at the start of the Second Seminole War in 1835. And here I introduced another important Jewish person in early Florida history, Abraham Charles Myers, for whom the city of Fort Myers is named, on the west coast of Florida. He was born in South Carolina in 1811, and in 1833 he graduated from West Point. He participated in the Second Seminole War in Florida, and in 1850, the general who became his father-in-law ordered a new fort to be built in southwest Florida called Fort Myers. This old Florida map tells a large story. It reflects the sequence of the earliest documentation of Jewish life in communities around the state, with photos of pioneers in each of those areas. If you start up at the top left corner with Pensacola, which was the first, as I indicated earlier, in 1763 when Jews settled there, Micanopy in 1819, then Tallahassee in 1837, Key West in the 1840s, Jacksonville in 1841, Tampa 1844, 48 years before there was even a South Florida. You notice I haven't said anything about South Florida yet, because there was no South Florida. Seventh was Ocala in the 1850s, then Orlando in 1865, right after the Civil War, Palm Beach, 1892, and Miami, also 1892, and that was the result of Henry Flagler bringing his railroad down the east coast of Florida. Then in 11 is St. Petersburg in 1901. Davie is the first place in Broward County where there was a Jew in 1910. Sarasota and Miami Beach, both in 1913. Now I'm finally getting to South Florida, as you see. Fort Lauderdale, 1915. Boca, interestingly, not until 1931 did the Jews settle there. And today, Palm Beach County hosts the state's largest Jewish population with about 238,000 Jews. Then in southwest Florida, in the Fort Myers, Naples area, Jews did not settle until the 1950s. Since I mentioned the population in Palm Beach County, I want to throw in here that Broward County today has about 170,000 Jews, and Miami-Dade County has about 123,000 Jews. The Moses Levy family is no longer Jewish. So who is the longest continuing Jewish family in Florida? The answer: the Delinsky family, who came to America in the 1840s, which connects back to Jacksonville and the watch that I showed you in the beginning. By 1850, Philip Delinsky, in the top left, was the first to arrive in Jacksonville. Then he brought 9 more family members. Philip married Ida Ehrlich. Their children were born in Jacksonville. In the top center, we have George sitting on the chair, who owned the pocket watch. He was born, if you remember, in 1857, and Regina, his sister, was born 2 years later. A brother, Maurice, in the top right, was a mayor of Jacksonville in 1882, and also the first president of Ahaveth Hesed in Jacksonville, which is the second congregation in Florida, and also, very importantly, as Steve indicated, his congregation growing up. Helena, one of the sisters of Philip, married Robert Williams, a Jewish cotton plantation owner in Tallahassee. All of the family married Jews. I find it truly remarkable that with so few Jews in Florida in the mid-19th century, and this is a statement of their adherence to tradition. This is an 1897 photo of their family in front of their Tallahassee home. And if you really look closely, you will see there were 5 daughters. All of them married Jews. Helena and Robert's first daughter, Rachel, was the first Jewish child born in Florida to the Dolinsky family. Another of the 5 daughters of Helena and Robert was Mina Williams, a third-generation Floridian Jew, and the first Miss Florida in 1885. The stories keep coming. Each time I speak, I learn something more, and perhaps some of you will have some things to tell me today. When I gave my book talk in Jacksonville in February, which was my last one before the pandemic shutdown, I was presented with a collection of letters translated from German by an 8th-generation descendant of the Dolinsky family. Mina married Julius Hirschberg of Jacksonville. This is one on the screen. This is one of a series of letters sent from Germany to Mina Hirschberg in 1940. It is unusual that a letter is addressed to the woman, Mrs. Mina W. Hirschberg, in the red circle, and unusual because these letters reference a donation she made in her own name, also unusual in 1940. The letters express the most urgent need is the acceleration of immigration of Jews from Germany, and there are passage costs. They are thank yous for her $250 US contribution and explain that $400 US are required to be paid to HIAS, the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, to sponsor each person to immigrate from the German Reich's territory. Another pioneer family active in business as well as civic and religious life are the Benjamins. Born in Prussia, Simon Benjamin in the inset at the top left, immigrated to Florida in 1865. He came to Alachua County to establish a business in the village of Waldo. He stayed there for 3 years until he was run out of town by the Ku Klux Klan and moved to Ocala, where he and other family members opened the first known ice-making plant in Florida. Imagine, this was a time when there were no refrigerators in which to store and preserve meats or electricity to operate them, even if they had existed. Many homes contained ice boxes, and the Benjamins delivered ice on wagons. Simon was president of the board of the Marion County Commission, on the school board, and served as president of United Hebrews of Ocala congregation. Simon, in the red circle in the center, moved into Jacksonville in 1901, began a cigar and tobacco business, and served as president of Steve's congregation, the Congregation of Ahaveth Hesed. His son, Roy Benjamin, the circle on the left, became a very famous architect who was acclaimed for theaters. He designed more than 200 movie theaters in the Southeast United States, including this 1934 Art Deco classic Colony Theater on Lincoln Road on Miami Beach. Probably many of you on the Zoom today have Roy Benjamin theaters in your communities. Meet Saul Snyder, cattleman in St. Augustine. In 1904, after serving in the Russian army, he left and was sent by the Jewish Agricultural Society to Fernandina Beach. Then in 1908, he settled in St. Augustine because he made the 10th man for the minion there. He first had a small grocery store, bought a cow, one cow, developed a cattle ranch, and eventually was a founder of the Cattlemen's Association in the 1950s when cattle was the state's largest industry. His cattle brand was a Mogan David, and his ranch was named Bar Mitzvah. And looking at you, Steve, I have to remember when I started the project and I had a humanities advisory council, and Marshall Sclair, is it Sclair or Sklar from Brandeis, your university, he was on my panel. And when he saw this picture, he said, he was a social deviant because he wasn't in the retail business, he wasn't a peddler. Jews have in Florida from the beginning made a living in retail and wholesale goods, first as peddlers. Then the peddlers transitioned into mom and pop stores around 130 years ago. Then there were large department stores opened by Jews. Samuel and Maurice Cohen arrived from Ireland in 1867 when Jacksonville was still under military occupation from the Civil War and established the Cohen Brothers store. They instituted price fixing. Up until that time, it was bargaining in stores. In 1912, they built this mammoth department store occupying an entire city block. It was the largest structure in Jacksonville, and at one time was the 9th largest department store in the entire United States. In business for 120 years, the building is now Jacksonville's City Hall. This is another of the large department stores owned by Jews. Abe and Benna Wolf Moz, last name Moz, but her maiden name was Wolf, and it's also an important name in retail. They came from Germany in 1894. Then brothers joined them. The first Moz Brothers store opened in 1896. The chain of 39 stores lasted 105 years and is now incorporated into the Macy's chain. And then Florida Jews developed shopping centers like University Town Center in Sarasota, developed by Nathan Benderson, and Aventura Mall, owned by the Sofer family, in Miami, Florida's largest mall and the nation's second largest, with more than 3 million square feet. And talk about largest, Auschwitz survivor Tibor Hollow in the inset on your top right, who arrived in New York in 1945 with $18. In 2018, opened the tallest building in Florida at 868 feet and 85 stories. It's in Miami with a 2,000-car parking garage. It was a cost of $800 million. We think that's really big, right? And then consider New York's 28-acre, $25+ billion Hudson Yards project, as the press calls it, a nation state for the 1%, brought to you by the most powerful city shaper in modern times. Stephen Ross graduated from Miami Beach High School in 1958, attended the University of Florida, and became the founding chair of the related companies. Ross is shown here standing on the highest observation deck in the Western Hemisphere at his Hudson Yards. Ross also owns the Dolphins football team, the first professional sports team in Florida. Many of Florida's sports teams are owned by Jews. As we drive around Florida today, we come across cities developed by and named for Jews, and causeways and bridges for Jews who have contributed much to the development of the state. Tobacco and cigars are a large part of the Jewish story in Florida, from North Florida to Key West. Most cigar factories were in Key West in the 1880s, then moved to Ybor City, which is the old part of Tampa, in 1891. In the book, I tell you why. This factory and label belonged to the oldest family-owned cigar maker in the United States, now into the 4th generation, and is the last cigar factory in Ybor City today that once had 150 factories, many owned by Jews. Note in the colorful label the Mogen David around the grandmother's neck. The brand is now sold in 80 countries. Jews have been notable in agriculture in Florida. When immigrants came from Florida in the 19th and early 20th centuries, they mostly had come from places where Jews could not own land or be farmers. So working the land was an attractive way to be independent to support their families. The earliest citrus king in Florida was Dr. Philip Phillips in the Orlando area. In 1897, he was the first known Jew to permanently settle there. By the early 1920s, he had developed 5,000 acres stretching across 9 central Florida counties. This made Phillips the largest individual citrus grower in the world at that time. He was responsible for several key innovations in the processing and packaging of orange juice. He sold to Minute Maid in 1954 and formed a foundation that supports many educational, medical, and cultural facilities in the Orlando area. I created a collage of many of them. These places reflect places that are named for his generosity, including in the lower right, the Orlando Performing Arts Center. Jews have been prominent in the area of construction. Look at this view of Miami Beach hotels, the Eden Rock and the Fontainebleau in the foreground, and realize that those two and so many others were built by Jews, including the architecture, construction, and preservation of Art Deco hotels. Harry Kaplan of Melbourne helped develop the spacesuit that astronauts wore for space travel until the May 30th SpaceX launch, when they changed the suit. Many Jews were involved in leadership positions at Cape Canaveral and the Martin Company. The fresh veggies that astronauts eat in space today were developed by Betty and Ed Rosenthal of Sarasota, founders of Floricon Fertilizer Corporation. Look at Betty's feet in the red circle to appreciate the proportion of the size of the red romaine lettuce. Using the Rosenthal's controlled release fertilizer, this humongous lettuce was the first crop grown in space in just 3 weeks from seed and consumed by the astronauts. It is acknowledged that maintaining our traditions has been vital to sustaining our heritage for 4,000 years. Florida's first Jewish organization was the 1857 Jacksonville Cemetery, founded after 6 members of the Delinsky family died during a yellow fever epidemic. Until that time, bodies had been shipped out of state for Jewish burial. Then came congregations that built synagogues. This was the first, Bethel, Pensacola, in 1876, which was reformed. By 1900, there were 6 Jewish congregations in Florida, and they all remain in existence. This is a story I was told by Charlotte Winkle in Sarasota when speaking at a temple there in the 1980s during my research phase. This is how I gathered my stories. I would speak all over the state, and people would bring me their pictures and their artifacts and tell me stories. In 1897, 100 years before I talked to Charlotte, in Russia, her father, Marcus Winkle, got his order to serve in the Tsar's army, which usually meant death. To avoid conscription, the family told the authorities that he had suddenly died of a high fever, and they actually buried him alive. Soon after the funeral, he was dug out by friends who were hiding in the trees in the woods. He picked up his clothing, which is pants that are shown in the photo, the money and the Torah also shown in the photo that the family had left by the grave. And he traveled to Palestine, mostly by foot. Then he settled in Palestine in Jaffa because that's where his father had deposited money in the bank for him. His father was a Zionist and already had land and money there. Soon after he arrived, the bank failed where his father had deposited the money. So he had to trudge back to Russia to tell his family he was going to America because in Palestine he had learned that was the best place for Jews. So he came to Moffat, east of Sarasota, and opened a lumber mill. Marcus married Hannah Ratkowski, a daughter of a founder of Yeshiva University, and brought her to Moffat. Imagine this Orthodox woman keeping kosher in Moffat, Florida. One day, and these are her 2 children, Abraham and Charlotte, the woman that was telling me the story. So one day, Hannah stepped on a rusty nail in the lumber yard. The mill hands wanted to wrap salt pork around her foot to draw out the infection, but she was so upset because she was kosher, and she could not have pork touching her body at all. This was the impetus for the family to move into Jacksonville because that was the largest Jewish community in the state until the 1930s. I found the Torah that Marcus had brought all along his journey from Russia to Palestine, back to Russia, and then to America and to Moffat. I found it in a Jacksonville synagogue, and it's now on display at the Jewish Museum of Florida. You see it on your right. An example of passing on Jewish traditions is Purim balls that began in Florida in 1880 in the pioneer Jewish communities of Tallahassee, Pensacola, Key West, and Jacksonville. In 1918, Fannie Moss of Jacksonville spent months collecting seashells to make this dress for the YMHA party. This 1883 news article on your left about a bris in Sanford describes the event in Victorian detail, including bringing the rabbi from Jacksonville by boat. And on the right is a 1916 article about a bris in Gainesville that was on the front page of the paper. And it's interesting because it was an article about a murder on page 4. But having circumcision ceremonies in these pioneer communities was a very major curiosity of the non-Jews. One of the images on my book cover is at the top left, the 1920 wedding photo of Gertrude Katz and David on an alligator is just one of a collection I gathered during my research of people with our state reptile. The first one I found was actually Felix Glickstein in Jacksonville. This is one of actually a wedding picture. Gertrude was a daughter of Rosa Benjamin and Jacob Katz, who had a large wedding in Micanopy in 1886, which is evident by the new coverage again in the article of the newspaper. You see it's very extensive. These pictures are of Rosa's parents at the wedding. I devote 13 pages of the book to Jews and politics. One early example is Jacob R. Cohen. He had a store in Orlando by 1873 and got politically active to form a city government, serving as secretary for the first meeting of the town council. He helped draft Orlando's charter in 1875 and resettled in Tallahassee, where he again was involved in politics after he married Rachel Williams, the woman that I showed you that was born in 1856, the first Jewish birth of the Delinsky family. They got married. He conducted the first statewide campaign for Jews in Palestine in 1915, went all over Florida to raise $10,000. And it was 20 years before the first Jewish Federation was organized in Florida, in Jacksonville. The first Jewish mayor of more than 200 in Florida was Henry Brash. Elected in 1879, the German immigrant served 3 terms in Mariana. Florida has had one Jewish governor, David Schultz, who was from Daytona. Florida's had nearly 300 judges and 5 Jews on Florida's Supreme Court. This is a typical German Jewish family, the Gundersheimers, who settled in Milton in the 1840s. Anna, in the red circle, married a Russian Jew, Jacob Barker. Their grandson's name was Bernard Barker. I kept mulling that name around in my head. Bernard Barker. Anyone sound familiar to anyone? You know it? He was the plumber in the Watergate break-in of the Democratic headquarters in 1972. I know this story because his cousin, Ann Shops, who was on my committee in Pensacola, saw him come into Temple one Shabbat when prisoners from nearby Eglin Federal Prison attended. He had first been recruited by E. Howard Hunt as an operative in CIA plots to overthrow Fidel Castro, and then recruited for Watergate. Descendants are still in Pensacola, and yes, they're still Jewish. As you know, Jews have been awarded 22% of all the Nobel Prizes. 2 of those Nobels were awarded to Floridian Jews. On the left, Marshall Nierenberg of Orlando, and a 1948 graduate of the University of Florida, and on the right, Isaac Bashevis Singer of Miami Beach. Jews are like cut flowers. We die without roots. These stories are our collective historic memories, our roots. I've shared a teeny tiny fraction of the photos I gathered in my 35 years of research throughout Florida, and about 6% of the images in my book. Rachel Heimovitz, who was 1989-90 president of the Southern Jewish Historical Society and founding managing director of its journal, utterly sums up my work this way, as you see on the slide. My book about Jews coming to Florida and to America is a long time coming testament to the contributions of Floridian Jews and crucial to understanding Florida, American Jewish history. It is about our family. I use the word family in my book more than 500 times. When I was growing up and a story appeared in the news, the family would gather around and ask, is it good for the Jews? I think my stories are good for the Jews. Yes, now you know that Florida Jews made ginormous contributions to the advancement of all civilization. We look back to ensure our moving forward. Thank you for listening to a few of my stories.
Thank you, Marcia. This was terrific. And I think in the interest of time, I'd like to switch in a minute or so to let some of our participants in the time allotted to ask you questions. But I just wanted to commend you for the richness and the variety of what you described, which I think for many people is eye-opening in terms of the full extent, the comprehensiveness with which Jews have contributed to the state of Florida, and the ways that Florida, of course, have offered them all sorts of opportunities. But in addition to praising your dedication and your devotion, I think you should also be praised, quite frankly, for your bravery, because there must be all sorts of Florida Jews who are indignant because their names may not be in the book. There may be all sorts of Florida Jews who are indignant that the treatment that you gave them is not large enough, so that there will still be other opportunities perhaps for their stories to be told. So I'm going to turn it over, I think, now to Jeremy, who will allow people to ask you questions, Marcia, along with my thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve, and Marcia, mazel tov on both the book and cramming all of that amazing history into 30 minutes. Well done. I've collated some questions from the chat that I would love to pose to you, starting with going back to kind of the earlier roots of Jewish life in Florida and this kind of dilemma of Jewish life in the South. Were there Floridian Jews that owned slaves?
The only one that we're aware of is Moses Levy and David Levy Hewley. They did own slaves. Moses Levy, as I mentioned, was an advocate for abolition, but he had to go to England to talk about that because he would have been run out of Florida. That was the culture of the time. That was how the business was operated, the plantations. We're not aware of anyone else that had the means to even accumulate land to be able to do that. But it's a big controversial subject today, and it's interesting. But yes, Moses and David. Moses had about 100 slaves on his plantation.
Very interesting.
I want to add that he believed in keeping families together, even in those times, and he believed in abolition, and he did not want slaves to be released until they were educated. He educated his slaves to make sure that when they were released, they were educated and the family stayed together. I think that's important to note.
Can you comment on any overt anti-Semitism that took place in Florida?
I have a whole chapter in my book, and I didn't get into that in this, as I was very limited. Normally my presentation is 70 minutes, and I devote a lot of it to anti-Semitism. Yes, in 1869, there was a man by the name of Samuel Fleischman who had a store in Mariana, and it was after the Civil War, and he was run out of town by the Ku Klux Klan and murdered when he went to Tallahassee to ask for help, the state capital, and his body was found on the road coming back. He was murdered by the Ku Klux Klan because he gave credit to freed slaves, and he had them as employees in his store. Anti-Semitism is a huge story in Florida, as everywhere. It's another driving force that made me write the book because of the times, and to be able to show that we can combat anti-Semitism by all this knowledge of what Jews have contributed. But we all know the story of Gentleman's Agreement, the movie, where Jews could not check into Miami Beach hotels. That was not just in Miami Beach. It was all over the state. Here where I live in St. Pete Beach, there was a Relum hotel right here on my beach that was started in 1940 by Jews because Jews couldn't check into any hotels here. This was all over the state. You see signs that Jews couldn't cross certain bridges. So yes, there's a huge story of anti-Semitism. It's a large chapter in my book, many, many examples that I would like for you to pay attention to. There's a very dark side. Even when we think of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, that even though that wasn't an anti-Semitic act per se, but of the total 17 dead, 5 were Jewish. And I have that story in my book where they thought at first it was an anti-Semitic act, but has been anti-Semitism since the beginning when Jews couldn't live in Florida for the first 250 years. So it started as an anti-Semitic place, and it's continued, unfortunately, very strongly.
Thank you for commenting on that. I hear this kind of anecdotal saying that Florida is the only place in the United States that you look north to find the South. And so I think they're particularly talking about South Florida, Miami-Dade County, all that, that has a very high population of Jews from the Northeast, people from the Northeast. How would you say that Florida fits into the narrative of Southern Jewish life?
I've never understood that. Well, first of all, about 50% of the Jews who live in Florida today do have roots in the Northeast, in New York and New Jersey. But as I started this project, everybody would say, oh, there's no one that was born in Florida. The people think that everyone came from somewhere else. As a matter of fact, when Mayor Koch came from New York many years ago when I was running the museum, he came to the museum, and the first thing out of his mouth is, I bring all of you greetings from your relatives in New York. He assumed that everybody in Florida was from New York, which of course is not true. In my book, you'll see all the countries and places in North America where people came from to Florida. I have a whole first section on that. So and I've never understood why Florida is not included as the South. I'm not sure about the question. I mean, are you saying that Florida is not included in the South? Because I've never understood that.
Yeah, well, typically when people refer to the South, they may mean North Florida, the Panhandle, but they typically don't refer to South Florida as the South. It's typically more, you know, Georgia, Alabama, that part of the Southeast.
I think it would be a good question for Steve. It's a scholarly question.
Yes, when I'm asked that, I think I would give two answers. One is, if Florida is not in the South, where would one put it? So it causes a kind of geographical blank for which the only answer is, of course, it has to be the South. The second answer I would give is that we shouldn't have too narrow and too homogeneous a view of the South. That I think professional historians, academic historians, including those who are associated with the Southern Jewish Historical Society, I think are more interested in trying to look now at the diversity of the South, the ways in which there are minority groups that were ignored in the past, the ways by which it was economically more diverse than simply thinking about cotton plantations or tobacco or indigo. So I think the alternative answer, Marcia, would be simply that Florida now, in all of the diversity that you have described, is simply part of to be understood as part of a region that should not be put in too narrowly, too homogeneous a framework.
Thank you so much. And my last question is about your book, and please tell, I'm going to share this too so everybody can see it. Please tell us about your book and you know, how people can purchase it, who it's published by, all that information.
Okay, it's published by the History Press. It's a big, heavy book, 8.5 by 11 hardcover, 434 pages, 716 books. In fact, I'm very proud that Steve's quote is on the back of my book. It's the first, I'm very proud to say, it's published by the History Press, which is part of Arcadia. It's the first comprehensive history of the Jews of Florida from colonial times to the present. And it's a sweeping tapestry of voices spanning centuries. That's what I tried to give you an example. These are all little short stories. In fact, it drives me crazy when people get the book. I want them to sit down and open it and read it from page 1 through the end. But people find themselves, they're all telling me they just like to read the little snippets of story. They just open the page and whatever it opens to, because the little stories are very rich. It gives readers a very unique look at a long and crucial history of the nation's third largest community, and it just had never been done before. So I think it's very important. It gives Jews a sense of pride that strengthens Jewish identity to help ensure Jewish continuity, and that was my main goal in writing this book, to strengthen Jewish identity. And to buy it, I think the slide is on the screen. The purchase price, I've reduced it to $50, special promotion for this showing. And you just email me, and then we can talk about inscription and how you want to pay and where to mail it.
Thank you all so much for your interest in our summer speaker series. Thank you to Professor Whitfield and Marcia Jo for the incredibly enlightening history of Jewish life in Florida. And hope to see you all again in the near future on future programs. Thank you so much for your interest, and stay safe and stay well.
Thank you.